Nobody will want to sit with you. Her sister laughed at the ball. The Alpha King pulled out the chair, and in that moment, the entire ballroom stopped breathing. Picture the scene. Helena, the rejected sister, publicly humiliated at the biggest ball of the year, alone at a table while everyone ignores her. Isabella, the perfect sister, laughs at her disgrace alongside her wealthy fiancé. But then, firm footsteps echo through the hall. Alpha King Dante Wolf, the most powerful and feared man in the north, crosses the grand mirrored ballroom, walks past all the most beautiful and important women in the city, and does the unthinkable. He pulls out the chair next to Helena and sits down. What did he see in her that no one else could? What is the secret of the crescent moon mark that Helena hides? And why is Isabella so desperate to destroy her own sister? This is a story of silent revenge, forbidden love, and destinies intertwined under the moonlight. If you love romantic redemption stories, you cannot miss what happens next. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single chapter of this epic saga. Leave your like if you're rooting for Helena and comment which city you're watching from. Let's connect our pack around the world. Helena Montero's slender fingers moved methodically across the spines of returned books, her emerald green eyes scanning each title before placing it precisely in its designated spot on the mahogany shelves. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall arched windows of Lunaris Falls Central Library, casting elongated golden patterns across the worn wooden floors that had been polished by a century of footsteps. She paused for a moment, adjusting her reading glasses and tucking a stray strand of long chestnut hair behind her ear, before reaching for the next stack of volumes waiting to be reshelved. At 23 years old, Helena had found her sanctuary among these stories, and the comforting silence that permeated this historic building. The library had been constructed in 1902, a gift to the town from one of the founding families, and it still retained its original character with ornate woodwork, a soaring ceiling with exposed beams, and the faint smell of old paper and leather bindings that Helena had come to associate with peace. Here, surrounded by thousands of stories and ideas, she felt valued in a way she never had anywhere else. Lunaris Falls was a prosperous city of approximately 30,000 residents, nestled deep in the dense pine forests of Washington state. The town had been built on timber money generations ago, and two influential families had shaped the community's development and maintained control over its economic and social structure for over a century. The Montero family, Helena's own lineage, controlled the vast majority of the timber industry and had expanded into real estate development over the past few decades. The Silvera family, their longtime rivals turned reluctant allies, dominated the banking sector and owned most of the commercial properties downtown. Together, these two dynasties formed an almost feudal power structure that touched every aspect of life in Lunaris Falls. Helena had always been considered the black sheep of the prestigious Montero family, a designation that had been whispered behind closed doors since childhood and had become increasingly explicit as she grew older and continued to disappoint expectations. While her older sister Isabella Montero embodied everything their parents valued and encouraged, Helena seemed to fail at every turn despite her best efforts to conform. Isabella was breathtakingly beautiful, with platinum blonde hair that fell in perfect waves, ice blue eyes that could freeze or captivate depending on her mood, and a figure that turned heads wherever she went. She chaired charity galas with effortless grace, appeared regularly in the society pages of regional magazines, networked with ease among the wealthy and powerful, and had recently become engaged to Lorenzo Silvera, the handsome heir to the Silvera banking empire, in what everyone called the merger of the century. Helena, on the other hand, preferred books to cocktail parties, had chosen what her family considered a modest and inappropriate career as a librarian, instead of joining the family business in some executive capacity, and possessed a gentleness and empathy that her mother Victoria openly called weakness. She had a distinctive birthmark on her left shoulder, a silver crescent moon shape about the size of a quarter that her family had always insisted she keep covered with high-necked clothing or scarves, considering it an imperfection that marred her otherwise acceptable appearance. Her mother had even suggested laser removal several times, though Helena had quietly refused each time. The library door chimed with its familiar melodic tone, pulling Helena from her thoughts. Mrs. Patterson, one of her most regular patrons, entered with her characteristic warm smile and a stack of mystery novels to return. Mrs. Patterson was a retired teacher in her 70s who read voraciously and always had insightful comments about the books she borrowed. These small interactions throughout Helena's workday, helping people find exactly the right book or discover a new author they would love, gave her a profound sense of purpose that the cold, political dinner parties at the Montero mansion never could. "Helena, dear, I finished the entire series you recommended," Mrs. Patterson said enthusiastically, setting her books on the circulation desk. "You were absolutely right about the character development in the later volumes. I was skeptical at first, but by book 4, I was completely invested." Helena smiled genuinely, the kind of smile that lit up her entire face and made her green eyes sparkle. "I'm so glad you enjoyed them. I have another author I think you might like. Let me show you." She led Mrs. Patterson to the mystery section, discussing plot structures and character arcs with the ease of someone who had read and loved thousands of books. After helping Mrs. Patterson select her next literary adventure, Helena returned to her shelving duties. Her phone buzzed in the pocket of her cardigan, and she pulled it out to see a text message from her mother. The preview was enough to make her stomach clench with anxiety. "The Winter Gala invitation arrived. Your presence is required. We'll discuss your attire this evening." Helena closed her eyes briefly, steeling herself. The Winter Gala. The annual event that she dreaded more than any other social obligation. It would be held in 3 weeks at the historic Lunaris Palace downtown, and it was where business deals were finalized behind closed doors. Social hierarchies were publicly reinforced and occasionally reshuffled. Political alliances were formed, and futures were determined for many young people in their privileged circle. It was a spectacle of wealth and power, where everyone performed their assigned roles in the carefully orchestrated social theater of Lunaris Falls. Marcus, her colleague and one of her only genuine friends, noticed the change in her expression immediately. He was a kind man in his early 30s with an infectious laugh and an encyclopedic knowledge of young adult fiction. "Let me guess," he said sympathetically. "Family drama?" "The Winter Gala," Helena confirmed, slipping her phone back into her pocket. 3 weeks of my mother criticizing everything about me, followed by an evening of being invisible while Isabella holds court. "You know you don't have to go," Marcus pointed out gently, though they both knew that wasn't really true. "If I don't go, I'll never hear the end of it. My mother will add it to her extensive list of my disappointing life choices, right below refusing to join the family business and choosing to work in a library." Helena tried to make her tone light, but the hurt underneath was evident. Marcus gave her shoulder a supportive squeeze. "Then we'll make sure you look absolutely stunning, and you'll show them all what they're missing by underestimating you." That evening, Helena steered her modest sedan through the wrought iron gates of the Montero estate, her hands gripping the steering wheel a bit too tightly. The sprawling mansion loomed ahead, a testament to old timber money and new real estate wealth. The house was an imposing structure of stone and timber, designed to evoke a mountain lodge aesthetic, but on a scale that was more palace than cabin. It sat on 20 acres of manicured grounds overlooking the valley, with views of the pine forests stretching endlessly toward the distant mountains that formed a jagged silhouette against the evening sky. Helena parked her car in the circular driveway, noting with resignation that Isabella's luxury SUV was already there, along with Lorenzo's expensive sports car. She took a deep breath, checked her reflection in the rearview mirror to make sure she looked presentable, and walked up the stone steps to the heavy wooden front door. She didn't bother knocking. This was technically still her family home, though she'd never felt like she truly belonged here. The interior was exactly as she remembered, all dark wood paneling, expensive artwork, and furniture chosen more for its price tag than its comfort. The house was filled with tension, an almost palpable energy that came from preparations for the winter gala consuming everyone's attention. Her mother's shrill voice could be heard from the main sitting room, giving instructions to someone about floral arrangements and seating charts. Helena found Isabella in the grand sitting room, surrounded by what looked like an entire boutique's worth of evening gowns laid out on every available surface. There were dresses in every color imaginable, each more expensive and elaborate than the last. Her fiancé Lorenzo stood nearby, leaning against the marble fireplace with his characteristic expression of bored superiority. He was undeniably handsome with his sandy blonde hair, blue eyes, and aristocratic features. But there was something hollow about him. He came from old money and had never worked a real day in his life, content to coast on his family name and considerable charm while contributing nothing of substance to the world. When Isabella noticed Helena entering the room, her perfectly painted lips curved into a smile that Helena knew all too well. It was the same expression Isabella had worn since they were children, right before she would do or say something calculated to humiliate her younger sister in front of their parents, or her popular friends. That smile promised cruelty, dressed up as concern, insults disguised as helpful observations. Well, the little mouse has crawled out of her library, Isabella said, her voice dripping with false sweetness that didn't match the coldness in her ice-blue eyes. Mother actually invited you to the gala? How charitable of her. Though I suppose every event needs wallflowers to make the rest of us look better by comparison. Lorenzo laughed on cue, encouraging Isabella's cruelty as he always did. He seemed to derive entertainment from watching Isabella tear down her younger sister, as if it was a performance put on for his amusement. Helena felt the familiar sting of humiliation wash over her, that burning sensation in her chest and throat that came from being publicly mocked by someone who was supposed to love her. But she kept her expression carefully neutral, refusing to give Isabella the satisfaction of seeing how much the words hurt. Their mother, Victoria Montero, swept into the room at that moment wearing her usual expression of vague disapproval whenever she looked at Helena. Victoria was an elegant woman in her 50s who had built her entire identity around social status, appearances, and maintaining the family's position in Lunaris Fall society. She had been beautiful in her youth, and traces of that beauty remained, but it had hardened into something cold and calculating. Her entire life revolved around who sat where at dinner parties, who was invited to which events, and what everyone else in their social circle thought about the Montero family. "Helena, you're here. Good," Victoria said briskly, barely glancing at her younger daughter, before turning her attention to the dresses spread around the room. "You'll need something appropriate to wear to the gala. I've already called Madame Dupont's boutique. They're expecting you tomorrow for a fitting. Try not to embarrass the family this year. Perhaps a high-necked dress in a dark color to cover that unfortunate mark on your shoulder and help you blend into the background." Helena swallowed the hurt that rose in her throat. Even now, after 23 years, her mother still couldn't look at her birthmark without disdain. "I was thinking I might choose my own dress this year," she said quietly. Isabella examined her perfectly manicured nails with exaggerated casualness, before delivering her next verbal blow with the precision of someone who had practiced cruelty as an art form. Honestly, Helena, I don't know why you're even bothering to go. Nobody will want to sit with you. You'll probably spend the whole evening alone at some corner table while the rest of us actually matter. You really think anyone would notice a little library mouse like you? You're not exactly gala material. You never have been. The words cut deep, slicing through whatever fragile confidence Helena had managed to build during her day at the library. They were designed to hurt, and they succeeded. But Helena had learned over the years to build walls around her heart, to create internal defenses against the constant barrage of criticism and dismissal. She excused herself quietly, murmuring something about needing to check on something upstairs, and retreated to what had been her childhood bedroom. The room was exactly as she'd left it when she moved into her own small apartment downtown 2 years ago, trying to create some distance from the toxicity of the family home. Her old books still lined the shelves. Her collection of pressed flowers still hung on the walls in simple frames. Her desk still sat by the window overlooking the forest. It was the only space in this enormous house where she had ever felt she could breathe freely. Helena sat on her old bed and looked out the window at the pine trees swaying in the evening breeze. Maybe Isabella was right, she thought with a surge of despair. Maybe she didn't belong in that glittering world of power and influence. Maybe she should just decline the invitation, save herself the humiliation of spending an evening being ignored or mocked. But something stubborn in Helena, some core of strength that refused to be completely crushed, pushed back against that thought. She would go to the winter gala. She would hold her head high. She would prove to herself, if no one else, that she could face her family's world without breaking. The following week passed in a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. Helena threw herself into her work at the library, volunteering to take extra shifts and organize a new local history exhibition that would require extensive research and curation. Anything to avoid thinking too much about the approaching gala and what it would mean to walk into that ballroom full of people who had watched her be diminished her entire life. Marcus, true to his word, insisted on helping her find the perfect dress. He showed up at her apartment one Saturday morning with coffee and determination written all over his face. "We're going shopping," he announced firmly. "And we're not going to that pretentious boutique your mother recommended. We're going to find you something that makes you feel like yourself, not like you're trying to be a pale copy of Isabella." They drove to a small boutique in a neighboring town, a place that specialized in elegant but understated fashion. The owner, an older woman named Claire with silver hair and kind eyes, took one look at Helena and seemed to understand exactly what was needed. "You have beautiful coloring," Claire said thoughtfully, studying Helena's face and figure. "Chestnut hair, green eyes, olive skin tone. You should be wearing jewel tones, not the washed-out pastels I imagine your family tries to put you in." Claire disappeared into the back of the store and emerged with several options. The moment Helena saw the teal-blue dress, she knew it was the one. The color was rich and vibrant, bringing out the green in her eyes in a way that made them look like actual emeralds. The dress itself was modest by gala standards. No plunging neckline or dramatic slit, but it was beautifully cut with delicate embroidery along the neckline and a flowing skirt that moved gracefully when she walked. The back dipped just low enough to show the silver crescent moon birthmark on her shoulder, the mark her family had always told her to hide. When Helena emerged from the fitting room, Marcus actually gasped. "That's it," he said with conviction. "That's absolutely it. You look like yourself, but the very best version of yourself. Confident, beautiful, real." The price was reasonable, especially compared to the designer gowns Isabella favored. Helena bought it without hesitation, along with simple silver jewelry that Claire recommended. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus helped her practice walking in the heels she'd purchased, taught her some basic techniques for managing social anxiety in large gatherings, and convinced her to wear her hair down for once, instead of in the practical bun she usually favored at work. On the afternoon before the gala, Helena stood in front of her bathroom mirror practicing the look she would wear. Not hopeful, that would invite disappointment. Not defiant, that would give her family ammunition. Just calm, neutral, present. She could do this. She would survive one evening, and then she could go back to her real life, the life she was building for herself away from the Montero expectations and judgments. Meanwhile, across town at the historic Grand Hotel, preparations of a different nature were taking place. Dante Wolfe had arrived in Lunaris Falls 3 days earlier, checking into the penthouse suite with his efficient assistant Rebecca and a small security team. At 29 years old, he was already a legend in business circles, featured regularly on the covers of Forbes, Fortune, and Business Week. The media had dubbed him the Wolf of the North, a nickname that had started as a play on his last name, but had stuck because it so perfectly captured his reputation in the business world. Dante's story was one of those rags-to-riches narratives that journalists love to write about. Born into a middle-class family in Montana, he had watched his father build a small sustainable forestry company through hard work and innovation. Then, when Dante was 19 and home from college for the summer, a drunk driver had crossed the center line on a mountain road. The resulting crash killed his father instantly and left Dante with severe injuries, including the scar that ran along his left jaw. He had inherited a struggling company burdened with debt and a grief so profound it nearly destroyed him. But instead of selling the company and walking away, Dante had dropped out of college and thrown himself into saving his father's legacy. He worked 18-hour days, learned everything he could about sustainable forestry and conservation, and slowly, methodically built the company into something much larger than his father had ever imagined. Now, 10 years later, Wolfe Industries was a multinational corporation with interests in sustainable forestry, green technology, renewable energy, and wildlife conservation. Dante himself was worth billions on paper, though he lived relatively modestly and donated massive amounts to environmental causes and educational programs. He had come to Lunaris Falls on business, investigating a potential investment in sustainable timber practices that could revolutionize the industry in the Pacific Northwest. The Montero family's operations had caught his attention during his research, though not necessarily in a positive way. Their practices were outdated, environmentally questionable by modern standards, and ripe for disruption. A company using cutting-edge sustainable forestry methods could potentially put the Monteros out of business within a decade, while actually improving forest health and providing better long-term economic benefits to the community. Attending the Winter Gala was a strategic move for Dante, a chance to observe the local power structure firsthand before making his final decisions about investing in the area. His assistant Rebecca had briefed him extensively on the key players: the Montero family with their timber empire and real estate holdings, the Silvera family with their control of local banking and finance, various city council members and state representatives who would be in attendance, and the complex web of relationships and alliances that governed decision-making in Lunaris Falls. One name had been mentioned almost as an afterthought during Rebecca's briefing: Helena Montero, the younger daughter who worked as a librarian and seemed to have no involvement in the family business. Rebecca had noted it as an oddity in a family where everyone was expected to contribute to building and maintaining the empire. The fact that Helena had been allowed, or perhaps forced, to pursue such a different path intrigued Dante, though he couldn't quite articulate why. In his experience, The black sheep of powerful families were often the most interesting people, the ones who saw the system clearly precisely because they didn't fit neatly into it. The night of the winter gala arrived with clear skies and a bright full moon that illuminated Lunaris Falls with an almost ethereal silver glow. The Lunaris Palace, a historic building constructed in 1908 during the height of the timber boom, had been transformed into a winter wonderland for the occasion. The building itself was architecturally stunning, designed in the Beaux-Arts style with soaring ceilings, massive crystal chandeliers that had been imported from Europe over a century ago, and walls covered in mirrors that reflected and multiplied the candlelight until the entire space seemed to glow from within. White roses and orchids adorned every surface, their subtle fragrance mixing with expensive perfumes and colognes. Silver decorations caught the light from hundreds of candles arranged in elaborate centerpieces on each table. Soft classical music played as guests began to arrive, each couple or group making their entrance with the self-awareness of people who knew they were being watched and judged. Helena arrived with her family, though "with" was perhaps too generous a term. She had driven separately and met them at the entrance, where her mother gave her outfit a quick, disapproving once-over, before turning away without comment. The teal dress that had made Helena feel beautiful and confident in Claire's boutique suddenly felt inadequate under her mother's dismissive gaze. Isabella, resplendent in a white designer gown that probably cost more than Helena made in 3 months, laughed with Lorenzo and her friends as they swept into the grand ballroom like royalty greeting their subjects. Her father, Richard Montero, gave Helena a brief nod of acknowledgement before immediately joining a group of businessmen clustered near the bar. Richard was a big man in his late 50s, his face weathered from years of working outdoors in his youth before he moved into the executive offices. He had built the Montero timber empire to its current size through aggressive expansion and by undercutting competitors, but the business world was changing in ways he didn't understand or want to accept. Sustainability and environmental concerns were cutting into profit margins, and younger, more innovative companies were starting to pose real threats. Helena stood alone near the entrance for several long moments, clutching her small silver purse and trying to look like she had somewhere to be, someone to meet. She recognized most of the attendees by sight, if not by name. The social elite of Lunaris Falls were all there, along with visitors from Seattle and Portland who had business interests in the region. Everyone seemed to know everyone else, moving in clusters of familiarity and shared interests, their laughter and conversations creating a buzz of sound that filled the cavernous space. Taking a deep breath, Helena made her way slowly through the crowd, murmuring polite greetings to people who barely acknowledged her presence. She found an empty table toward the side of the grand ballroom, not quite in the shadows, but definitely removed from the prime seating near the dance floor and the raised platform where speeches would be given later in the evening. It had a decent view of the proceedings, but was clearly positioned for those who didn't quite belong in the inner circles of power and influence. As Helena settled into her chair, trying to look comfortable and unconcerned with her solitude, she observed the social dynamics playing out around her. Isabella's laugh rang out frequently from across the room, where she was holding court with Lorenzo and several other young socialites who orbited around her like planets around the sun. Her sister was in her element here, beautiful and charismatic and cruel in equal measures, basking in the attention and admiration she received from all quarters. Helena caught her sister's eye for just a moment across the crowded room. Isabella's expression was triumphant, vindicated. See. Her look seemed to say with crystal clarity, I told you nobody would want to sit with you. I told you that you don't belong here. You should have stayed in your little library where people like you are supposed to hide. Helena looked away, focusing instead on the elaborate ice sculpture centerpiece on a nearby table. She told herself that she would stay for exactly 2 hours, the minimum amount of time that couldn't be called leaving early. She would eat whatever meal was served. She would watch the dancing from a safe distance, and then she would slip out quietly without anyone noticing or caring that she had gone. This was survivable. She had survived worse. She could get through one evening of loneliness in a crowded room. Approximately 30 minutes into the gala, something shifted in the atmosphere of the ballroom. It was subtle at first, a slight pause in some conversations, heads beginning to turn toward the main entrance. Then the change became more pronounced, like a current running through the crowd, causing people to stop mid-sentence and redirect their attention. Helena looked up from the menu card she had been studying and saw what had captured everyone's focus. Dante Wolf had just entered the ballroom, and his presence commanded immediate attention. He was an imposing figure at 6 feet 3 inches, his height emphasized rather than diminished by the perfectly tailored black suit that fit his broad shoulders and athletic frame, like it had been designed specifically for him, which it probably had. His dark hair was styled back from his face, revealing strong, masculine features dominated by penetrating eyes that were an unusual golden brown color, almost amber in certain lights. The scar that ran along his left jaw, a remnant of the accident that had killed his father, somehow made him more compelling rather than less. It was a visible reminder that he had survived tragedy and emerged stronger, that he had built an empire from ashes and grief. But it was more than just his physical presence that drew every eye in the room. There was an aura about Dante Wolf, a sense of coiled power and absolute confidence that came from someone who knew exactly who he was and what he was capable of achieving. He moved into the ballroom with the calm assurance of an apex predator entering new territory, unworried about any challenges because he knew he would prevail. His golden eyes swept across the assembled crowd, assessing, cataloging, reading the social dynamics and power structures with the same analytical intelligence that had made him billions in the business world. Rebecca, his assistant, walked slightly behind him, murmuring information into his ear while gesturing subtly toward different areas of the room. She was efficiently identifying key players, providing context about relationships and alliances, giving him the information he would need to navigate this particular social and political landscape. But Dante's expression remained politely neutral, showing no indication of being impressed or intimidated by the gathering of Lunaris Falls elite. Helena watched as her father practically sprinted across the ballroom to greet Dante, his face flushed with a mixture of anxiety and forced joviality that she recognized all too well. Several other prominent businessmen rushed to join Richard, creating a small crowd, competing for the honor of shaking Dante Wolf's hand and being seen in conversation with him. The man was worth more than everyone in this room combined, and they all knew it. An investment from Wolf Industries could transform any business, any project, any venture into a guaranteed success. Isabella had positioned herself strategically nearby, though she was still technically with Lorenzo. Helena felt a pang of second-hand embarrassment watching her sister prepare to deploy her considerable charms on yet another powerful man. Isabella had perfected the art of making men feel like the most important person in the world, while subtly asserting her own desirability and value. She would angle her body just so, laugh at exactly the right moments, touch an arm or shoulder with calculated casualness. It was a performance she had been practicing since adolescence, and she was extraordinarily good at it. Dante shook hands with the various men greeting him, his manner polite, but distinctly distant, as if he were going through expected motions without any real investment in the interactions. Rebecca continued to brief him quietly, and Helena could see him nodding occasionally, filing away information for later use. It was clear that his attendance at the gala was purely strategic, a business move rather than a social one. He was here to gather intelligence, make observations, and perhaps identify potential partners or obstacles to his plans for the region. Helena returned her attention to her table, picking up the elegant menu card to give herself something to do with her hands and to avoid looking as pathetically alone as she felt. The first course would be served soon. She would eat her meal in solitude, as she had expected, and then she would slip away after the main course before the dancing became too painful to watch. It was a simple plan, survivable. She had endured worse evenings before, and she would endure this one. But fate had other plans. Plans that would change everything Helena thought she knew about her place in the world.